middle.
Oh my goodness. Well, I want to thank Facebook for inviting me to participate, for having an extraordinary event on incredibly important topics. This panel is called, So Your Kids Are Online, but Will They Be All Right? And that tees up many of the issues we've already talked about this morning. We have an incredible panel here today of experts. I'm not one of them. I'm a privacy and tech lawyer, and I have a podcast, Their Own Devices, so I'm going to turn to the four of you. Immediately to my left is Ann Collier. Ann is the founder and the executive director of the Net Safety Collaborative. She blogs at netfamily.org. She's been in this space for 20 years and also led a task force in the Obama administration on these issues. To her left, then, we have Lucy Thomas, who is joining us from Australia, the CEO of the Project Rocket. She has dedicated her life to issues around bullying. She has personally worked with thousands of youth on these issues, and we're excited that you made the trip. To her left, we have Allison Schaefer joining us from Canada. Allison is a parenting expert, a family counselor, and an author. And then last, we have Andrew Shabilsky, who is a professor and researcher at Oxford University, focusing research on the impact of technology on individuals and looks at evidence-based decision-making. So with that, let's just dig in. Obviously, there are enormous value and benefits from technology. We've heard about some of the pitfalls, and when it comes to our children, we're particularly concerned. So looking at that, and I'll start with you, and then we'll go down. My first question is, what do we know today, and where do we need more research when it comes to how our children navigate the online world?
Well, one of the things that there was a whole group of very important findings by a national task force here in the U.S. A few years ago, and one of them was that not all young people are equally at risk online. And the second part of that was that the children who are most at risk online are those who are most at risk offline. And so much of the messaging in the internet safety space for so many years has really been directed at children in families with engaged parents, not vulnerable youth, not at-risk youth. And so I think probably moving forward, we need to focus more on that. And I think, to the credit, a couple of shout-outs. Vicki Rideout is a researcher who's done some really wonderful work about social media and mental health. We heard this morning about the importance of mental health and focusing on that, and I think our field is more and more. And another really great study, came out of the Born This Way Foundation from Lady Gaga's group. So we're moving in a good direction, I think.
I'm curious, and this is not what we rehearsed, but do you all agree with what Ann said, which is that one of the things that we do know is that those who are more at risk offline are also more at risk online, and so it doesn't target, or the issues are not the same across populations. Do you all agree with that?
I completely agree with that. To the point where I'm hoping that it puts a focus on where we invest in helping parents improve family life in those early years in development, so that when those kids do become introduced to social media and the world of technology, they've got that solid foundation so that they thrive in that environment, because we keep hearing about all these great uses and applications. But if you're lonely and if you're isolated and you go to the dark side of the web and technology, that's where the problems aren't just small problems like having a small problem in your community. Now you've got mammoth-sized problems.
Yeah, I would like to chime in just quickly to say that one of the things we do know is that parents are very, very bloody scared of the
impact. I'm one of those.
Of the impact of the online world on young people. But I think that fear, and we were discussing it briefly before, tends to reduce young people to a homogenous group as just relegated to the role of being the child, like everyone's someone's child, rather than being a complex, layered, complex human being. Pretty much. And to speak to that idea of particular groups of young people being at risk, that's what we don't see. And this is what we don't know a lot about when we treat young people as the same blanket label.
Yeah, so I'd say, kind of zooming out a little bit, kind of when a new technology comes out or there's a new innovation in culture, whether it be Dungeons and Dragons or rap music or violent video games, typically the same kind of cluster of basic but wrong questions And simple but wrong answers are proposed, generally treating all children as they are the same, thinking that there's some kind of one-to-one dose-response relationship between exposure to this new thing and something that we're afraid of as parents and our kids. And then very, very infrequently does the discussion actually get to the point of talking about kids as different, or having a mature scientific conversation about what would be a risk or vulnerability factor, either socially, contextually, or individually for a young person. Typically what happens is that a new technology is devised, and it's a bit like Groundhog Day, and then everybody is worried about the next new shiny, terrifying thing. And so I think that keeping our eye on the ball with respect to this heterogeneity is probably a very, very good idea.
Okay, so we have agreement on that core issue, which I think is really interesting. What is an issue where we absolutely need more research because we don't have the information we need in order to make evidence-based decisions or inform policies or work with experts? What would you pinpoint as a place where we need that additional work?
It's almost the kind of research that we need.
Yeah.
What I hear researchers say is that we need more longitudinal research. We need to watch experiences and behaviors and practices over time, and I think that's beginning to happen. And then, Andy, you can speak to the kinds of research other than that, but I know we need to dig in different ways now.
Yeah, so I think that there's often, even before research, there needs to be an agreement on terms. So earlier in the morning we heard about things like the concept of harm and how there's kind of a punting process where nobody bothers to define it. Similar things happen with pornography or violence or content or contact. And I think that kind of confusion around things like tech addiction, that makes it actually very hard to study empirically, and it makes it very easy, if it's something that you know when you see it, it's something very easy to kind of drum up concern, but not necessarily concerns that could lead to something programmatic, like a meaningful policy, a meaningful intervention, or useful advice besides just say no. Which is the typical abstinence approach.
So
for all
bouncing
tech.
off of that,
Yeah.
again, let's go with unrehearsed questions,
Yeah.
which is, if in fact what we need are, and I would agree, right, scientific-based longitudinal studies over time with peer-reviewed research, we also know that technology is evolving at such a rapid clip that studying how teens may have interacted with social media 5 years ago might have absolutely no application to what they're doing today with new technology. And so given that challenge, how do we cope with that? Because I can tell you, I'm a dad of a 13-year-old, I don't want to wait 10 years for the research. We need to have something now.
Can I throw a wild card in there?
We love
which
wild
is-
cards.
I actually think there's a real place for quick and dirty research as well. I think that academia moves at a glacial pace, and I'm sorry,
You just gave the professor a heart attack.
That was
Five
provocative.
papers this year.
I'm just going to put it out there, and when I say that as
He's
well,
going to hit the floor.
research that includes young people not just
Yes.
as guinea pigs,
Yeah.
but actually in co-design.
Participants.
One of the things that's really challenging, I think, for researchers is to maintain relevance to get through ethics, approvals, and that's a whole other conversation. But we do see some great research coming out of Australia, led by the likes of Amanda Third, that puts young people in the researcher position as well, so that they're actually architects of the research that concerns them the most. And I think that's where research can have its greatest impact.
Right, and you're saying we shouldn't treat young people as the lab rats we're studying. Yes. We need to incorporate them. We need to understand them and hear their perspective if we're really there to help them.
As you do on your podcast, you actually talk to them and you get them to speak very candidly
they
about
scare the
their
heck out of me.
experiences.
So, but just to add to that point, I actually think that young people as participants and as kind of part of a team is actually a much more important point than the one about technology always changing, because you can go to stuff that was written before most of us were born about technology, and you'll find people calling for the bans on Space Invaders because it's too addictive. You can go to BBC articles from when the Dreamcast was released and it had internet functionality, and you can sub out Mortal Kombat and you can sub in Pokemon Go, and there is actually no incremental learning. So you're right, technology is always changing, but the quality of the science is so low, we would have no way of knowing that besides an appeal to common sense or expertise.
But on the other hand, we do know that I don't like this phrase, but I'm going to use it. When technology is developed, it's not neutral.
Yeah.
And in fact, all technology and platforms aren't going to be the same because the platforms make very intentional, very informed decisions in their UI, in their UX, in defaults, in encouraging kids to share or not, auto scroll or not. And so those are really important discussions, and that's why I would say like Dungeons and Dragons wouldn't be the same as an online platform that has default settings and UI UX.
Those are important discussions, and I think parents and kids and educators and kids need to have those discussions for sure. But I'm going to say something kind of controversial here, and I have a feeling Allison agrees with me, but it's really that we're talking too much about technology. I think really the vast majority of what we've been talking about all day is about our humanity, much more than our technology. And just to sort of cap that, I'm going to look at my notes because I want to quote him accurately, but psychiatrist Gabor Mate up in Vancouver said that we need to take the focus off the technicalities of how to control the kids and their media and get back to work on the relationship. And that's what we're really talking about. And Allison, you know a lot more about that than me.
So, classic example. In my practice, a lot of parents will talk about the difficulty in setting limits and boundaries and getting their kids off tech. But it turns out that they have difficulty setting limits and boundaries about almost anything. So if we don't address these foundational type problems in the relationship and how we parent kids, it's just amplified, just another example with technology. So same thing, you're saying we should talk to our kids. Well, right there, parents don't know how to communicate. They don't know how to have conversations about difficult topics, let alone if they're being bullied online. Like they're saying, how do I get my kid to talk at all? How do I get them to open up? How do I get them to do something other than grunt? So we need to teach all those foundational skills, and then they'll be applied with technology and online.
And technology is a way to get to those really important conversations.
Well, and there's where technology can be our friend, because I love the fact, like Snapchat, I love Snapchatting with my kids. I get these real moment, instant, I feel their joy, I'm kind of with them in the day, just touch, point, and go. If I picked up the phone and said, how was your day, I would get a completely different emotional connection around that.
Well, you and I have very different views on Snapchat. But
Actually, on that.
That's another panel.
I think that we tend to speak to that. There tends to be a bit of an issue when we look to technology to fix our problems because we were the ones that created the problems. You know, there isn't an algorithm to solve misogyny online. And, you know, sexting wasn't invented by Snapchat. And actually, when we think about the diverse and wonderful ways that people are, you know, using photographic technology, not just to exploit others, but as a statement that I'm here and I exist in the world, not just an expression of narcissism, we end up reducing what's really happening online to these problems, to these basic problems that predate the technology, you know, that have been around for generations. And, you know, that's why when we talk about these issues at Project Rocket, we name that cyberbullying is not a technological problem. It's a social issue that plays out in technological spaces. And looking for these technological fixes actually takes away our agency and young people's agency to navigate their own lives and problem solve.
So can we this is a difficult issue, and it's a global issue. And so how does the fact that we have different cultures, different values, different norms, different socioeconomic groups who have access to different technology, religion, geographic issues, how is this going to play into this issue around in helping to ensure our kids have a healthy and safe experience online? How do we grapple with that diversity?
We do that within the context of our own cultures. Every single culture and community on the planet has parents, and they parent from their cultural and political and everything else environment. And that's what it's about, parenting in and with technology. So it's a very different cultural discussion in India, where my friend Dr. Kumari is dealing with a great deal of issues that surround danger for young women and, well, women of all ages. And that's a huge, literally online risk in India, and there's plenty of misogynistic hate speech in this society as well, but it's a little bit less physically dangerous in our culture. But so we're working within our cultures on these things.
Well, and I think one of our cultural issues now is in North American culture, we have really shifted our focus of parenting. We really have commoditized raising kids, that they are products that we have to prepare to release into the workforce, that I'll get a return on my investment because they're going to get a good enough education to have a career to support me. And so we start productizing them very early in life. So by the time they get to technology and they now have a marketing platform with their pictures and how they want to present themselves to the world, they compete for the most likes and for
But
popularity and
that's
fame.
really a small part of North America, isn't it? Like, you're describing like probably like my community, but I don't know that that is the community in certain urban areas of certain populations or minority groups, or how it's playing out in certain rural areas in the Midwest or rural parts of Canada, right? So you say North America, but I'm not sure that's North America.
I think happiness equates to success in many parts of the world, or falsely equates to success.
I am actually just really excited by the diversity piece altogether. For context, at Project Rocket, we run workshops in schools all over Australia, and it's a broad and vast and varied continent. And I've been doing this work for 13 years. It's literally been my entire adult life, is going and having conversations with teens about these issues. And I think the thing that leaves me really hopeful and excited is young people's capacity to lead these conversations within their own communities. And when I hear parents talk about the challenges that they face, they seem very focused on their own child's well-being, rather than extending that focus to the role that their child can play in someone else's well-being. And I think that we have a huge opportunity to develop allyship among young people, especially when it comes to diversity. And for us, that's meant really like charging our team of young presenters and facilitators with those diverse experiences. So making sure that we do have young people who are same-sex attracted and gender diverse, visible, having these conversations. Young people who are newly arrived, First Nations people in Australia, so important given the history of violence and oppression that exists. We can't have these conversations without empowering people to lead them who have the lived experience and can really impart that allyship to young people.
So let's get a little more specific.
Could I just add? To the question of diversity and well-being and culture, I'm just curious if there's a global platform that collects granular behavioral and communication data on more than 2 billion people. I mean, if you're quantitative, there might be one of these in the world. Because often the examples you give of different ways of segmenting or understanding a population is a really good one, Mark. But often when researchers kind of want to study these things, they fall back on categories like country or city or whatever. But it might be very much the case that people who live in cities, no matter what country you're in, are themselves much more alike within certain tranches in terms of their behavior, in terms of their cultural construals. And that actually somebody in the middle of the country in the United States is actually very, very similar to someone in the north of England.
So Andy, can I just ask you, I think you're talking about psychographic data, not just
my goodness.
demographic, right? No,
Goodness,
but
yeah.
that's what Facebook can collect.
Yeah,
So
it does.
are you telling us that only Facebook collects psychographic data? And do universities, can they work with that data now? Or
I would never use that term. But
I'm sure not.
But no, in any case, I like most things or many things, I think of your question, honestly, Mark, as an empirical one. So I think this is one we could study. Is there this kind of heterogeneity across groups? What do these groups actually look like? There are many fundamentally unaddressed, basic and applied scientific questions that can only be addressed at the scale of the classes of data that would otherwise be used for other ends on the platform.
Huge
So I want to get more concrete.
Sorry about that.
So our panel, well, it's an important topic, but we could go on.
Yeah.
We talked outside and debated research and access to data. I'm a privacy guy, so it gives me a little heartburn. But let's get concrete. So we're talking about the health of children online. So what is one issue when it comes to children navigating the digital world that we really need to address now and going forward? I'll let anyone go first.
I can jump in. I think we need to see a bit of a shift from protecting young people and children in our approach. And I'm not going to say that that's unimportant at all, but what I've observed is that the most well-intentioned efforts to protect young people actually often result in cutting them off from access, from their rights from all of the positives that the online world affords. So, we tend to protect young people from the risk of online harms, predators, cyberbullying, the invasion of their privacy, but in doing so, we often cut them off from learning, from expression, from access to new communities, the capacity to build resilience and problem solve as well. And so I think we really need to create a bit of a shift where we acknowledge that young people need support and safety rather than just protecting them.
If I could just put in a plug for the UNCRC, its 30th birthday this year. It's a vitally important document, even though the United States hasn't ratified it and isn't the only country in the world that hasn't. Be that as it may, it's not so much a shift, I think, as a balance. And the Children's Rights Framework, which is really a human rights framework, has three main categories of rights: protection, provision, and participation. And we need a balance there. You were talking about agency, Luce, and that's, if we just focus on child protection and treat young people as just potential victims or sitting ducks, as we say in America, we are removing all agency from their experience. If we, in balance, honor their rights of participation, then they can protect themselves and each other and their communities. We're giving them, allowing them the agency that it shouldn't even be a question. We shouldn't be allowing them. It should just
I'm
be
going to
there.
just jump in with a quick
Okay.
challenge to that.
Yep.
Is that, right, I've got my 13-year-old now,
Yep.
and we haven't talked about the fact that we know about adolescent development. We know that the frontal lobe is not fully developed. They are not equipped to necessarily make the best long-term risk calculations. They are focused on instant gratification, not long-term consequences. And the digital world plays into that in a way that, as I would explain to my son, can have unintended consequences, that what you do online can become public and likely can be permanent, and it changes the dynamic. And so, yes, we want to engage them, we want them to participate. My kid has more tech than I care to admit on this stage. On the other hand, he needs to understand in a pretty robust way, and parents need to engage so that I'm working with some teenagers who are 14 who have been suspended from school for some fairly goofy things they did online that appeared innocuous, but out of context in the principal's office were not innocuous. The consequences are real.
There's a media professor at USC named Henry Jenkins, of whom I'm a huge fan, who has said that, he said it on our online safety working group in 2009. He said we've left children largely on their own online by blocking, surveilling, controlling their experiences rather than mentoring them in media. And these are their rights of provision. That's where parenting comes in. That's where school comes in. Instead of blocking technology and vilifying and demonizing it, we need to use it for these conversations to mentor and teach digital literacy, social literacy, and media literacy. I need to shut up now.
So a concrete issue that we should be concerned about, a specific issue.
Just time management. The volume
Right.
of time, the ability to
I
stop
could
and
use
engage
that.
in
I'm not
real
a-
life. I'm doing homework, but I've got 3 other things open, and I say that I'm going to dock the phone when I go to bed, but really I'm not. I'm going to go upstairs and sneak around behind
Are
you.
you talking about the parents or the kids?
Yes,
Right.
both. Yes, both. Yeah, and I think that, and to your point about the digital literacy, I think that's part of why parents are overwhelmed, because they understand they're supposed to mentor and teach their kids, and they realize that their kids know much more than they do, and they really feel it's too complex for them to learn, and they're time strapped, and so they feel that the equation can't get resolved, and that's leading to
Right.
tremendous
I-
anxiety in parents.
A concrete, specific issue that we ought to worry
Yeah,
about?
well, I'd say it's really it's a case of unknown unknowns. So we have a situation now where we have things that we think of as harms or threats. They bubble up, things like cyberbullying, and they will consume a lot of attention, even if they're not nearly as much of a problem as face-to-face bullying is in the lives of young people. And then we deploy different forms of treatments or interventions that are themselves not evidenced. And so, like, there's a massive opportunity cost to this mode. If we don't define the problem, if we don't measure the problem, and then kind of propose a series of solutions that are themselves vetted, we lose out on very important opportunities to actually fundamentally make a positive contribution to, say, the parent-adolescent experience, because you're not going to have a zero-risk childhood. It's just, in the UK, 45 kids go to the emergency room every day from hurting themselves on trampolines, and there are going to be things like suspensions. And so the question really isn't how do we completely bubble wrap adolescence, it's what is the level of risk we're willing to adopt as a society, and then how do we triage these risks? And the only way to do that is, again, with actual science, because if we're led around by fear, we're going to be in a really tough spot in 5 years.
So let's end with advice. So I'll let you guys, we'll go down the panel, but I'll leave it to you. You can choose advice for this community, meaning this community of activists, experts, authors who are working on this, or advice that you might give parents who are concerned, right? You said they are concerned, they are grappling with many issues as parents, technology being but one of them. So in our closing minutes, advice for the community or advice you might give parents who are raising so-called digital natives?
Lucy, what advice would you give parents? I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I thought,
No, I'd love to answer that question. I think I've been really sitting here hearing these different points of view, and there's been something in my mind that I'd really love for, I'm sure there are lots of parents in the room, and I'd love for them to take away. And I think about the lens of how an online behaviour can be both problematic and helpful at the same time, and the complexities that we're kind of grappling with. And a quick example would be selfies, right? There was a wave of kind of media around people, this generation being like super narcissistic, and this idea that certain social media platforms might actually validate kind of that egocentrism that is supposed to be seen as part of this generation. I actually don't agree. But what I really noticed is, more recently, we've started, as a younger generation, really shifting the way that we look at a simple behaviour like selfies. As more and more oppressed groups have started to rise up and gain voice and power behind their identities, a simple selfie is no longer an act of, look at me, please validate me, but actually it's much more complex. So often, it's a statement of, I am here, I exist. And I see young people now being able to recognise that and validate that, to see that a selfie can be an expression of body positivity or visibility for people of colour or, activism. And I just really encourage parents to have those kind of nuanced conversations about what this actually means.
You know what, I want to use our last minute to see if there's anything from the audience, and then we can go. So we have a mic here. We need to get you the mic. But I really did enjoy that point about the selfies.
just speak into it.
Yeah, I think there is risk in not really understanding.
Sure.
In the absence of any evidence base, can I stand up?
It's off.
Yeah, it is. Sorry. I think there's a risk in not looking at how this technology, especially the platforms, are really impacting the behavior change in terms of future. How it is shaping the new mind is something which we don't have much research on. And I would think that so many people online, and especially with Facebook, there is a possibility of going into more evidence-based research, knowing about, because just ignoring that idea and saying, okay, it's all very nice, it's all very good, only parents are responsible, what is offline is online, is little bit missing that point, that this is really a futuristic shaping of human minds, which is going to be, which direction it is going. I mean, I'm not necessarily saying it's negative, but if it is positive, then what is the direction? I think there's a big role for research agencies in looking at all this data and statistics.
Right.
No, I think that research is going on. We need
Yeah,
it needs to be cross-disciplinary, right?
Yeah, so I think a really curious thing has actually happened in the last 20 or so years, where if you were a psychologist or a sociologist or a cultural anthropologist and you wanted to, say, understand something about mindset or human play, you could go to a schoolyard, you could watch children and kind of make a series, not like Jane Goodall, but make a series of kind of, draw a series of inferences and conduct science all across the qualitative, quantitative spectrum and kind of gain insights.
I apologize, but we have to wrap.
No, but I mean, the crazy thing that's happened is that the public square in many ways has shrunk. So it's harder and harder for scientists to understand what's happening. So there may be no change in the global mindset but we'd have no way of knowing because scientists can't make those observations.
So, a complex set of issues, but a fantastic set of issues. And I just want to thank these 4 panelists for allowing me to go, wow, way off script, and having a really, really vibrant, robust discussion. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
I'm going to steal this water.
Thank you.
Oh.